The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the weathered trading post, and Lillian Montgomery pressed herself against the wooden seat, her fingers white-knuckled around the handle of her carpetbag, as the driver's booming voice announced their arrival in Clifton Hill, Missouri. It was September 1872, and she had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to marry a man she had never met, fleeing a past where raised voices had meant broken bones and terror that still lived in her chest like a caged bird desperate to escape. Harrison Everett stood on the dusty Main Street, his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun, watching the stagecoach with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety that made his stomach tight. He had placed the advertisement 6 months ago, needing a wife to help build the life he envisioned on his cattle ranch. But now that the moment had arrived, doubt crept through his mind like winter frost. The driver climbed down and opened the door, and Harrison stepped forward, ready to greet his bride with the practiced greeting he had rehearsed a dozen times. But when Lillian emerged from the coach, something in her posture made him pause. She moved with the careful precision of someone navigating a minefield, her eyes darting to assess every person on the street before settling on him with what he could only describe as measured fear. She was beautiful in a fragile way, with auburn hair pinned beneath a simple bonnet and green eyes that seemed too large for her pale face, but it was the way she flinched when the driver dropped her trunk that made Harrison's chest constrict with unexpected concern. "Miss Montgomery?" he asked, keeping his voice low and even, some instinct telling him that volume would be a mistake. "I am Harrison Everett. Welcome to Clifton Hill." Lillian's shoulders dropped slightly, the tension easing just a fraction as she studied his face. He was tall, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting, but his brown eyes held a gentleness that surprised her. "Mr. Everett," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for meeting me." "Let me get your trunk," Harrison said, reaching for it carefully, making sure his movements were slow and predictable. He had broken horses, raised cattle through harsh winters, and survived more than his share of trouble in his 30 years, but something about this woman's obvious distress touched a protective instinct he had not known he possessed. "The wagon is just over there. The ranch is about 5 miles outside town." The ride to the ranch passed in near silence, broken only by Harrison's occasional quiet comments about the landscape or the property they were approaching. Lillian sat rigid beside him, her hands folded in her lap, listening but offering little in return. The ranch itself was modest but well-maintained, with a sturdy house built from local timber, a barn that looked newly painted, and corrals that stretched toward the rolling Missouri hills. Harrison helped her down from the wagon, again moving with deliberate care, and showed her inside. The house was cleaner than Lillian had expected, with simple furniture and curtains that looked like they had been hung with more practicality than aesthetic sense. "The bedroom is through there," Harrison said, gesturing to a door on the right. "I have been sleeping in the loft above the main room. I thought you might want some time to settle in before we discuss the wedding arrangements. The Reverend in town said he could perform the ceremony whenever we are ready." Lillian turned to look at him, surprise flickering across her features. "You do not expect us to marry immediately?" "I expect you have had a long journey and might appreciate some rest," Harrison replied, setting her trunk down gently. "There is water in the pitcher, and I will make something for supper in about an hour. Take your time." She nodded, still watching him with that careful assessment, and retreated into the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. Harrison stood in the main room for a long moment, staring at the closed door and wondering what kind of hell had put that look in her eyes. He had known hardship, had lost his parents to cholera when he was barely 20 and built this ranch from nothing but determination and backbreaking work. But he recognized trauma when he saw it, and Lillian Montgomery carried it like a second skin. Over the next few days, Harrison moved through his own house like a stranger, constantly aware of Lillian's presence and her reactions to everything around her. When he dropped a skillet while cooking breakfast the second morning, she had jumped so violently she knocked over her chair, and the apology that spilled from his lips was matched by her own stammered explanation. When his ranch hand, old Charlie Watson, had shouted a greeting from the barn, Lillian had gone pale and disappeared into the bedroom for over an hour. It was Charlie who finally said what Harrison had been thinking. "That girl has been hurt bad, boss," the older man said quietly as they mended fence on the fourth day. "Real bad. You see the way she watches doors like they might explode. My sister was like that after her first husband got through with her." Harrison drove the post into the ground with more force than necessary. "I figured as much. I just do not know how to help her." "Maybe you just keep doing what you are doing," Charlie suggested. "Being patient, being quiet. She will come around when she feels safe if she ever does." That evening, Harrison found Lillian in the kitchen, attempting to make bread with the supplies he had stocked. She was struggling with the dough, her inexperience obvious, but the determination on her face made him smile despite himself. "Would you like some help?" he asked from the doorway, pitching his voice low. She looked up, flour dusting her cheek, and after a moment she nodded. "I am not very good at this. My father never allowed me in the kitchen much. He said I was too clumsy." Harrison moved into the room slowly, rolling up his sleeves. "My mother taught me before she passed. The trick is not to overwork it." He stepped beside her, careful to leave space between them, and demonstrated the gentle kneading motion. Their hands moved in parallel, and he could feel the tension in her gradually easing as they worked together in companionable silence. "Why did you place an advertisement for a wife?" Lillian asked suddenly, her voice still quiet but less guarded than before. "You seem perfectly capable of managing on your own." Harrison considered the question, his hands still working the dough. "I suppose I got tired of being alone. This ranch, everything I built, it feels hollow without someone to share it with. I want children someday, a family, but more than that I wanted a partner, someone to build a life with." He paused, then added carefully, "I am sorry if that sounds presumptuous. I know we barely know each other." "It does not sound presumptuous," Lillian replied softly. "It sounds honest." "I appreciate honesty." She shaped her portion of dough into a rough loaf and placed it in the pan he provided. "I should tell you why I answered your advertisement." Harrison waited, not pushing, and after a long moment Lillian continued. "My father was a violent man. He drank, and when he drank, he raged. My mother died when I was 12, and after that, I became the target of his anger. 2 months ago, he beat me so badly I could not walk for a week. When I recovered, I took what little money my mother had hidden away and left. I saw your advertisement in a newspaper at the boarding house where I was staying, and it seemed like providence. A chance to start over somewhere he could never find me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with pain and confession. Harrison felt anger rise in his chest, hot and fierce, at the thought of anyone hurting her, but he forced his voice to remain calm and gentle. "He will never touch you again. I promise you that. And I promise you that I will never raise my hand to you or my voice in anger. That is not the kind of man I am or the kind of marriage I want." Lillian met his eyes, searching for deception and finding none. "How can you promise that? Men always say things they do not mean." "Because I know what it is like to feel powerless," Harrison said quietly. "When my parents died, I was left with nothing but debt and a piece of land no one else wanted. People in town thought I would fail, thought I was too young and too inexperienced. Some of them were cruel about it, taking pleasure in my struggles. I swore then that I would never make another person feel small or afraid if I could help it. I have kept that promise for 10 years, and I will keep it for the rest of my life. Something shifted in Lillian's expression, a crack in the armor she had built around herself. "I want to believe you," she whispered. "I want to believe that there are good men in the world." "Then let me show you," Harrison replied. "We do not have to marry right away. We can take our time, get to know each other. I will not rush you into anything you are not ready for." Over the following weeks, Harrison kept his word with a patience that astonished even Charlie. He taught Lillian how to bake bread properly, how to tend the vegetable garden he had planted behind the house, how to recognize the different bird songs that filled the Missouri mornings. He spoke to her, always in that same low, gentle voice, even when discussing mundane matters like supply orders or fence repairs. When he needed to call to her from another room, he would walk closer rather than shout. When something frustrated him, like a broken wagon wheel or a stubborn cow, he would mutter under his breath but never explode into the kind of rage Lillian had learned to fear. Slowly, incrementally, Lillian began to relax. She stopped flinching quite so violently at sudden noises. She began to smile more often, particularly when Harrison told stories about his early days on the ranch, tales of mishaps and small triumphs that made her laugh in a way that lit up her entire face. She started leaving the bedroom door open at night, a sign of trust that Harrison recognized and treasured. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and crimson, Lillian reached over and placed her hand on Harrison's arm. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact, and he went very still, afraid to move and break the moment. "I think I am ready," she said softly, "to marry you if the offer still stands." Harrison turned to look at her, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. "Are you sure?" "There is no rush, Lillian. I meant what I said about taking our time." "I am sure," she replied, and her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way he had not seen before. "You have shown me nothing but kindness and patience. You have made me feel safe for the first time in my life." "I want to be your wife, Harrison. I want to build that life you talked about." They were married 3 days later in the small church in Clifton Hill, with Charlie and a few of the townspeople as witnesses. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony with warmth and dignity, and when Harrison kissed his bride for the first time, it was with a gentleness that made Lillian's eyes fill with tears. The celebration afterward was modest, held at the town's boarding house, but the joy on both their faces needed no embellishment. The first months of their marriage were a continuation of the careful dance they had been performing, but with each passing day, the barriers between them lowered. Harrison never pushed, never demanded, always asking permission before entering a room where Lillian was changing or moving closer to embrace her. He courted her as if they were not already married, bringing her wildflowers from the fields, reading to her in the evenings from the small collection of books he owned, teaching her to ride his gentlest horse so she could accompany him around the ranch. Lillian, for her part, began to open like a flower that had been kept too long in shadow. She discovered she had a talent for managing the household accounts, her neat handwriting filling the ledgers with careful notations. She befriended the women in town, particularly Martha Grayson, who ran the general store with her husband and who had also come west to escape a difficult past. She started wearing brighter colors, trading the somber grays and browns of her arrival for calico prints in blue and green that complemented her eyes. But it was the small moments that truly marked their growing intimacy. The morning Harrison woke to find Lillian had climbed into the loft where he still slept, curling against him in the pre-dawn cold. The evening she told him about her mother's love of music, and he surprised her a week later with a small piano he had hauled from Kansas City, hiring 2 men to help him transport it. The night she finally felt comfortable enough to make love with him fully, without the shadow of fear, and they discovered together the profound connection that physical intimacy could bring when built on trust and affection. Winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by mid-November. Harrison taught Lillian how to help with the winter feeding, how to recognize signs of illness in the cattle, how to keep the water troughs from freezing solid. They worked side by side in the cold, their breath making clouds in the air, and the partnership Harrison had hoped for began to fully materialize. It was during a particularly harsh storm in January that their bond was truly tested. Harrison had gone out to check on the cattle in the far pasture, despite Lillian's worried protests, and when he had not returned after 3 hours, she made a decision that would have been impossible for her months earlier. She bundled herself in every warm thing she could find, saddled the gentle mare Harrison had taught her to ride, and set out into the blizzard to find him. The wind howled around her, snow stinging her face and making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead, but Lillian pushed forward, calling Harrison's name into the storm. She found him nearly a mile from the house, pinned beneath his horse which had slipped on ice and fallen. The animal was unhurt but spooked, and Harrison's leg was trapped beneath its weight. "Lillian," he called out when he saw her approaching, his voice raised not in anger but in fear for her safety. "You should not be out here. It is too dangerous." For a moment, Lillian felt the old terror rise up, the automatic response to a raised male voice, but then she pushed it down, recognizing the difference between fury and concern. "I am not leaving you," she called back, dismounting and approaching the fallen horse. "Tell me what to do." Together, working through the storm, they managed to calm the horse enough to get it back on its feet, freeing Harrison's leg. It was badly bruised but not broken, and with Lillian's help, he was able to mount her horse while she led them both back to the ranch. By the time they reached the house, they were both half frozen and exhausted but alive. As they huddled by the fire, wrapped in blankets and drinking hot coffee, Harrison reached for Lillian's hand. "You saved my life today. You were so brave." "You have been teaching me to be brave," Lillian replied, squeezing his fingers. "Every day, with every kind word and gentle action, you have been showing me that it is safe to be strong, that I do not have to be afraid all the time." "I am proud of you," Harrison said softly. "So incredibly proud. But please, promise me you will never take a risk like that again. I could not bear it if something happened to you." "I promise to be careful," Lillian said, "but I will not promise to stay safe while you are in danger. That is what marriage means, is it not? Being there for each other no matter what." Harrison pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. "Yes," he murmured, "that is exactly what it means." Spring brought renewal to the ranch and to their marriage. Lillian discovered she was pregnant in April, the news bringing tears of joy to both their eyes. Harrison became even more attentive if that were possible, insisting she rest more and take on lighter tasks, though Lillian protested that she was perfectly capable. They argued about it gently, with smiles and compromise, learning the art of disagreement without anger. "I am not made of glass," Lillian told him one afternoon when he tried to prevent her from hanging laundry. "The doctor said exercise is good for me and the baby." "I know you are not made of glass," Harrison replied, keeping his voice soft despite his concern. "I just worry. I cannot help it. You and this baby are everything to me." Lillian set down the laundry basket and came to him, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are strong because you have made us strong. Trust in that, Harrison. Trust in what we have built together." He did trust it, and over the months of her pregnancy, he learned to balance his protective instincts with respect for her growing confidence. Lillian bloomed with impending motherhood, her body changing in ways that fascinated them both. She sang while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her, and Harrison would stop whatever he was doing just to listen, marveling at the transformation from the frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach less than a year ago. Their son was born on a crisp November morning, arriving with impressive lungs and a full head of dark hair like his father. They named him Henry Thomas Everett, and Harrison held him with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked from his son to his wife. "Thank you," he whispered to Lillian, who lay exhausted but radiant in their bed. "Thank you for trusting me, for giving me this family, for everything." "Thank you for teaching me what love is supposed to feel like," Lillian replied, watching her husband cradle their child with infinite tenderness. "For showing me that there are men in this world who keep their promises." The years that followed were not without challenges, but they faced each one together with the same patience and partnership that had built their foundation. The ranch prospered, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful in the county. Charlie retired eventually, and they hired younger hands, Harrison teaching them by example the importance of treating animals and people alike with respect and care. 2 years after Henry's birth, Lillian gave birth to twin daughters, Rose and Claire, who inherited their mother's auburn hair and their father's steady temperament. The house rang with laughter and the chaos of young children, and Harrison built additions to accommodate their growing family, always consulting Lillian on every decision, making sure the home they were building reflected both their dreams. One evening, when Henry was 6 and the twins were 4, Lillian stood on the porch watching her family. Harrison was in the yard teaching Henry how to rope a fence post, his voice low and encouraging as their son struggled with the unfamiliar skill. The twins were playing near the garden, arguing over a doll in the way of small children, their voices high and dramatic. Martha Grayson, who had come for afternoon coffee, stood beside Lillian, following her gaze. "You have built something beautiful here," Martha observed. "Not just the ranch, but the life itself. It gives hope to those of us who have known darker times." "I never thought I could have this," Lillian admitted quietly. "When I stepped off that stagecoach, I was so broken I could barely function. I expected, at best, a marriage of convenience, a safe place to hide. I never imagined I would find love, real love, and a man who would honor his promises every single day." "Harrison is a good man," Martha agreed. "The way he speaks to you, to the children, even to the animals, it is like he understands that gentleness is its own kind of strength." "He taught me that," Lillian said, her voice warm with affection. "He taught me so many things, how to trust again, how to be brave, how to believe in goodness. Every day he speaks softly to me, to all of us, and in doing so, he drowns out all the loud, angry voices from my past." Inside the house, the piano Harrison had bought all those years ago sat in the corner of the main room, its keys worn from regular use. Lillian had taught herself to play over the years, and in the evenings after the children were in bed, she would play while Harrison sat nearby, reading or simply listening. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together, a daily reaffirmation of the peace they had created. That night, after the children were asleep and the ranch was settled for the evening, Harrison and Lillian sat together on the porch as they so often did. The Missouri stars spread above them like scattered diamonds, and the sound of crickets filled the warm air. Harrison had his arm around his wife's shoulders, and she leaned into him with the comfortable ease of long familiarity. "You ever regret it?" Harrison asked suddenly. "Answering my advertisement, coming all this way to marry a stranger?" Lillian turned to look at him, surprised by the question. "Never. Not for a single moment. Do you regret placing it?" "God, no," Harrison replied, pulling her closer. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and the children, this life we have made, it is more than I ever dreamed possible. I just worry sometimes that I do not tell you often enough how much you mean to me." "You tell me every day," Lillian said softly, reaching up to touch his face. "Every time you speak gently when you could shout. Every time you ask instead of demand. Every time you show our children that a man can be strong and kind at the same time. You tell me with every action that I am loved and valued and safe. That is worth more than 1,000 spoken declarations." Harrison turned his head to kiss her palm, emotion thick in his throat. "I love you, Lillian Everett, more than words can express." "I love you too," she replied, and kissed him with all the passion and tenderness that 8 years of marriage had nurtured. "Thank you for saving me, Harrison. Thank you for teaching me that home is not a place to fear, but a place to flourish." The years continued to roll by, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing children. Henry proved to have his father's gift with animals and his mother's head for numbers, already talking about expanding the ranch when he was old enough to take over. The twins, while identical in appearance, had vastly different personalities. Rose was adventurous and bold, constantly getting into scrapes that made Lillian's heart leap into her throat, while Claire was thoughtful and artistic, filling pages with sketches of the ranch and the surrounding landscape. When Lillian turned 35, Harrison threw her a surprise party, inviting half the county to celebrate the woman who had become the heart of their community. She had become known throughout Clifton Hill for her charitable work, organizing food drives for struggling families and teaching other women skills she had learned over the years. Her past was known to those closest to her, and she spoke openly about it when she felt it might help others, using her story as proof that healing was possible with time and the right support. During the party, as Lillian looked around at the crowd of friends and neighbors who had gathered, she was struck by how far she had come from that terrified woman on the stagecoach. She had built a life beyond her wildest imaginings, not by forgetting her past, but by refusing to let it define her future. And at the center of it all was Harrison, watching her with love and pride in his eyes, still speaking softly, still moving gently, still being the steady presence that had allowed her to transform. That night, after the guests had left and the children were in bed, exhausted from the excitement, Harrison and Lillian walked out to the pasture where they could see the full expanse of their land spreading beneath the moonlight. The cattle were dark shapes in the distance, the barn stood solid and secure, and the house glowed with lamplight behind them. "You remember that first day?" Lillian asked, slipping her hand into Harrison's. "When I stepped off that stagecoach, so afraid I could barely speak." "I remember thinking you looked like you might bolt at any second," Harrison replied with a small laugh. "I remember being terrified I would do or say something wrong and confirm whatever fears you had brought with you." "You did everything right," Lillian assured him. "From that very first moment when you kept your voice low and gentle, you started healing something in me I did not even know could be healed. You have continued to do that every day since." Harrison pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. "You healed me too, you know. I did not realize how lonely I was until you arrived and filled all those empty spaces. You taught me that the ranch was just property until we made it a home together. You showed me what it means to be truly seen and accepted." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other and the life they had built, until the night grew late and the chill drove them back inside. The house was quiet as they checked on each sleeping child, adjusting blankets and pressing kisses to foreheads before retiring to their own room. As they lay in bed, Lillian's head on Harrison's chest and his arm around her shoulders, she felt the complete peace that had become her daily companion. The nightmares that had once plagued her sleep had faded years ago, replaced by dreams of the future and the family they were raising. She no longer startled at sudden noises or watched doors with apprehension. She had learned to laugh freely, to speak her mind without fear, to trust in the permanence of Harrison's love. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison murmured in the darkness, his voice a low rumble beneath her ear. "I am thinking about how grateful I am," Lillian replied softly. "For you, for our children, for this life. I am thinking about how a single act of courage, answering that advertisement, led to everything I hold dear. And I am thinking about how your decision to speak softly, to be patient and gentle, changed not just my life, but the lives of our children and everyone we touch. You have created ripples of kindness that spread far beyond this ranch." Harrison tightened his embrace, moved by her words. "We created those ripples together. Your strength, your resilience, your capacity to love despite everything you endured, that inspires me every day. We are partners in this, Lillian. Always have been, always will be." The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect Missouri day that made even hard work feel like a blessing. The family gathered for breakfast, the table full of noise and laughter as the children competed for attention and shared their plans for the day. Harrison sat at the head of the table, dispensing pancakes and gentle wisdom in equal measure, while Lillian orchestrated the chaos with practiced ease. After breakfast, as Harrison prepared to ride out to check the far fences, Lillian walked him to the barn. It was a routine they had maintained for years, these few moments alone to connect before the day's demands pulled them in different directions. Harrison saddled his horse with efficient movements while Lillian leaned against the stall door, watching him with affection. "Charlie sent word he might stop by this afternoon," Lillian mentioned. "He wants to see how much the twins have grown." "That old codger just wants to raid your cookie jar," Harrison replied with a grin, but his eyes were warm. "Tell him he is welcome anytime, as always." "I will," Lillian promised. Then, more seriously, "Be careful out there. I know the fence line is tricky near the creek." Harrison came to her, cupping her face in his calloused hands. "I am always careful. I have too much to come home to take unnecessary risks." He kissed her softly, then mounted his horse. "I love you, Lillian. See you this afternoon." "I love you too," she called after him as he rode out, her heart full as she watched him go. Even after all these years, she sometimes had to pause and marvel at the miracle of their relationship, at the fact that a man could be exactly what he promised to be, day after day, year after year. The afternoon brought Charlie as predicted, and the old ranch hand spent happy hours with the children, telling them exaggerated stories of their father's early days on the ranch. Henry listened with rapt attention, already hero worshipping his father in the way of young boys, while the twins climbed all over Charlie with the privilege of honorary grandchildren. When Harrison returned as the sun began its descent, he found his family and oldest friend gathered on the porch, and the smile that crossed his face made Lillian's breath catch. After all these years, she still felt that flutter in her chest when he looked at her, still marveled at the depth of love she felt for this gentle, strong man who had taught her that safety and passion could coexist. That evening, after Charlie had departed and the children were in bed, Harrison surprised Lillian by taking her hand and leading her out to the barn. He had hung lanterns from the rafters, casting a warm, golden glow over the space, and he had spread blankets in the hayloft, creating a private sanctuary. "What is all this?" Lillian asked, charmed by the gesture. "I realized we never had a proper wedding trip," Harrison said, pulling her close and beginning to sway to music only he could hear. "We have been so busy building this life, raising our family, that we have not taken time to simply be Harrison and Lillian, not parents or ranchers or any of the other roles we play. So I thought, for one evening we could pretend we are young and carefree, with nothing to worry about but each other." Lillian laughed, delighted, and allowed herself to be swept into the impromptu dance. They moved together in the lamplight, their bodies knowing each other so well that words were unnecessary. When the dance ended, they climbed into the hayloft and lay on the blankets, looking up through the open loft door at the stars wheeling overhead. "Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if we had never met?" Lillian asked dreamily. "Sometimes," Harrison admitted. "And then I immediately stop because the thought is too depressing. You are woven into every part of who I am now. I cannot imagine myself without you." "I would have died," Lillian said quietly, with the certainty of absolute truth. "Either at my father's hands or from the despair of that life. You did not just give me a new start, Harrison. You gave me life itself." Harrison rolled onto his side to face her, his expression serious in the lamplight. "You gave yourself life by being brave enough to leave, to answer that advertisement, to trust despite every reason not to. I just provided a safe place for you to heal. Everything else, all the strength and joy and love that was already inside you, you just needed the space to let it grow." Tears pricked Lillian's eyes, the good kind that came from being deeply understood. "We saved each other then," she said softly, "and we keep saving each other every day." They made love then, in the privacy of the hayloft, with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never dimmed. Afterward, they lay entwined, talking quietly about dreams for the future, about plans for the ranch, about their hopes for their children. They talked until the lanterns began to gutter and the night grew late, and then they returned to the house, to their bed, to the life they had built together. The seasons turned, bringing new challenges and new joys. The ranch expanded with the addition of more land, purchased from a neighbor who was retiring. Henry, now 9, began taking on more responsibilities, shadowing his father with serious determination. The twins started school in town, arriving home each day bursting with stories and lessons learned. And through it all, Harrison and Lillian remained the steady center, their love the foundation upon which everything else was built. On their 10th anniversary, Harrison took Lillian back to Clifton Hill, to the exact spot where the stagecoach had stopped a decade before. They stood there together, hand in hand, while Harrison spoke words he had been preparing for weeks. 10 years ago, a frightened, brave woman stepped off that stagecoach and into my life. I was so nervous that day, afraid I would disappoint you, afraid I was not good enough to be the husband you deserved. But you saw something in me, or you were desperate enough to take a chance, and you stayed. You have given me 10 years of joy, 3 beautiful children, and a love deeper than I knew existed. You have taught me that true strength is measured not in how loud one can shout, but in how gently one can speak. You have shown me that patience is not passive but active, a daily choice to honor and respect the person you love. I promise you another 10 years and another after that, and as many as God grants us, of speaking softly, acting gently, and loving you with everything I am." Lillian was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her husband. 10 years ago, I was running from a nightmare, hoping at best for survival. Instead, I found a dream I had not even known to wish for. You have given me safety, yes, but so much more than that. You have given me confidence, joy, purpose, and a love that has healed wounds I thought were permanent. You have shown our children what a good man looks like, how a husband should treat his wife, how strength and gentleness are not opposites but complementary. I promise you the rest of my life, however long that may be, of loving you, partnering with you, and being grateful every single day that I was brave enough to answer your advertisement. They kissed there on the dusty street, in the same spot where their journey had begun, and the few passers-by smiled at the obvious love between the couple. The Everetts had become something of a legend in Clifton Hill. The mail-order bride who had been afraid of her own shadow and the cowboy who spoke so softly you had to lean in to hear him, who had built one of the most successful ranches in the county and raised children who were the delight of the community. That night, back at the ranch, they celebrated with family and friends, the house overflowing with laughter and good wishes. But later, when everyone had gone and the children were asleep, Harrison and Lillian sat once more on their porch, in the chairs that had become molded to their forms over a decade of evening conversations. 10 more years, Lillian said contentedly, her hand in Harrison's. And then 10 after that. It does not seem like enough time to love you as much as you deserve. Eternity would not be enough, Harrison replied, bringing her hand to his lips. But we will take what we are given and fill every moment with this, with us, with the life we have created. With soft words and gentle touches, and the kind of love that heals and builds and endures. The years that followed proved the truth of those words. Their children grew, each finding their own path while carrying the lessons their parents had taught them. Henry eventually took over the ranch, running it with the same careful stewardship his father had demonstrated. He married a schoolteacher from town, a smart, kind woman named Anna, and they gave Harrison and Lillian their first grandchildren. The twins, too, found their way. Rose married a lawyer and moved to St. Louis, where she became involved in women's suffrage, her boldness finding a worthy cause. Claire stayed closer to home, marrying a local artist and opening a gallery in Clifton Hill that became a cultural centerpiece for the growing town. Both credited their father's gentle strength as the model by which they judged all men, and both were grateful for the example of their parents' loving partnership. As Harrison and Lillian grew older, their love deepened rather than dimmed. They moved through their days with the comfortable synchronicity of two people who had spent decades learning each other's rhythms. Harrison's hair went silver, and Lillian's auburn faded to a softer strawberry gray, but the way they looked at each other never changed, still full of wonder and gratitude. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a grand celebration, inviting people from all over Missouri who had been touched by the Everett's kindness and example. The party was held at the ranch, under a tent that could barely contain the crowd, and speaker after speaker rose to toast the couple and share stories of their impact. Charlie, now in his 80s but still sharp as a tack, stood with some difficulty and raised his glass. "I have known Harrison Everett for over 30 years, he said, his voice carrying across the tent. I watched him build this ranch from nothing, and I watched him become a man of integrity and honor. But the day that little red-headed woman stepped off that stagecoach, that was the day he became truly great. Because he had to rise to meet her courage with his own gentleness. He had to be worthy of the trust she was placing in him. And every day since, for 25 years, I have watched him keep that promise, to speak softly, to act gently, to love completely. If you want to know what a good marriage looks like, look at these two." The applause was thunderous, and Harrison pulled Lillian close, Both of them moved beyond words. When it was their turn to speak, they stood together, Harrison's arm around Lillian's waist, presenting a united front as they always had. 25 years ago, Harrison began, his voice still low and gentle despite the crowd. I asked God for a partner to share this life with. He sent me Lillian, who needed gentleness, and in giving her that, I learned what true strength really means. She taught me that the greatest power we have is the power to heal, to comfort, to create safety for those we love. Every soft word I have spoken, every careful action I have taken, has been repaid 1,000 times over in the joy of watching her bloom, of raising our family together, of building this community alongside her. If I have any wisdom to share, it is this. Love is not loud. Love is not forceful. Love is the gentle persistence of showing up every day, of honoring your commitments, of speaking softly and carrying not a big stick, but an open heart. Lillian took a shaky breath, then added her own words. I came to Missouri running from violence, expecting at best a cold arrangement of convenience. Instead, I found a man who taught me that I deserved tenderness, that my fears were valid but did not have to control my future. That love, real love, is not about possession or control but about freedom and partnership. Harrison gave me the space to heal, the support to grow, and the security to flourish. Our children, our grandchildren, this community, they are all the fruits of that choice he made 25 years ago to speak softly always, to never raise his voice in anger, to show me through his actions day after day that I was cherished and safe. I hope everyone here knows what a rare gift that is, and I hope the men present will consider what power they hold to heal or to harm, and choose as Harrison has always chosen, to be gentle, to be kind, to speak softly and love deeply. There was not a dry eye in the tent by the time they finished, and the party continued late into the night, full of music and dancing, and the kind of joy that comes from celebrating something genuinely worth honoring. The years continued their inevitable march, bringing the full richness of a life well lived. Grandchildren became teenagers, then adults. The ranch passed fully into Henry's capable hands, though Harrison remained involved, offering advice when asked and working alongside his son when his aging body allowed. Lillian's hair turned fully white, but she remained active in the community, a grandmother figure to half of Clifton Hill, and a source of wisdom and comfort to women still finding their way. They celebrated their 50th anniversary quietly, just the two of them, taking a slow walk around the property they had nurtured for half a century. Every fence post, every building, every tree held memories, layers upon layers of shared experience that had become the fabric of their lives. 50 years, Lillian marveled as they stood at the spot where Harrison had been trapped under his horse all those decades ago. It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. I would do it all again, Harrison said, his voice raspier with age but still gentle, still soft. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, all of it exactly the same as long as it led to this, to us. No regrets, Lillian asked, though she knew the answer. Only that we do not have another 50 years ahead of us, Harrison replied with a smile. But I will take what we have left and treasure every moment. They stood there together, two people who had become one through years of patience, understanding, and unwavering commitment, watching the sun set over the land they loved. And in that moment, with Harrison's arm around her and her head on his shoulder, Lillian felt the complete circle of her journey. From the terrified woman who trembled at every raised voice to the confident matriarch who knew, with absolute certainty, what love was meant to be. Harrison had taught her that, with his soft words and gentle ways, proving every single day that the strongest force in the world is not violence but tenderness, not shouting but speaking softly always. Their story became legend in Clifton Hill and beyond, passed down through generations as an example of what marriage could be when built on respect, patience, and genuine care. The mail-order bride who had arrived trembling with fear, and the cowboy who had learned that true strength was measured in gentleness, who together had built not just a ranch, but a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone.